as Philip said, I'm from Nuremberg, but I'm presenting the work on behalf of Carina Bieber, who actually did most of the research in this area, and she is now in Göttingen. Okay, so what is our topic basically about? You already see some terms here like user emotion recognition and something like AI and challenges for training data creation. And I want to introduce the topic a bit so that you understand where we actually are and what we are trying to achieve and what the challenges are that I'm actually talking about. The major research area in which we are in is user experience. And user experience, I mean, there is the correct definition of it, but just to make it easy, whenever you interact with the user interface and you somehow have a positive feeling with it, so nothing negative, then you probably have also some kind of positive user experience. But user experience does not always mean that you need to be delighted or whatever, but at least you don't have negative emotions when you interact with the user interface, then you already have a good user experience. And the basic idea of our research is that we want to measure the user experience that users have when interacting with the user interface by analyzing the interaction data that they produce. So whenever you interact with the user interface, you create interaction data, like when you click with a mouse somewhere or you interact with the keyboard and hit the different keys on the keyboard, then you produce interaction data. And this interaction data can not only be processed, but it can also be recorded and can be analyzed afterwards. And our idea is to analyze this interaction data that we record using some kind of AI to identify user experience issues and to potentially remove them. Yeah, and that's the basic idea. For example, if you observe something like sadness, you may interact differently with the keyboard or with the mouse in comparison to when you observe something like joy, right? Why do we actually focus on that area? So if you can measure the user experience just based on the user interaction data, it would give UX research better insights into what the issues of the users actually are in the field. So if you, or currently, all these things need to be done manually. So if you want to know about the user experience of users, you actually need to ask them to interact with your user interface. You observe them while they are doing that, and then you analyze what they are actually doing. But it takes quite some manual work to derive the actual user experience. But if you have an AI that can do that, you don't have to do that manual work. But the AI can probably tell you there is a problem. Their users need some kind of support, or probably you have to look at this part of the user interface to actually improve it. And that's why we're doing that. And if you can do that also at runtime, then it would give you the opportunity to directly measure the UX. And in the very situation where the users interact and potentially observe a negative user experience, you can directly interfere and somehow react on these negative emotions. And this is something that can be done in the very far future, but that we are currently laying the baselines for this. So if we want to have some kind of AI, how do we actually get it? How do we create it? What we need to create this AI is, first of all, some training data. So what we need is some interaction data for which we know also the user emotions. So some mouse clicks, some mouse movements, some keyboard interactions. So list of these things, and in addition to that, the corresponding emotions that the users had while they were interacting with the user interface. And if you have this data, you can use it after some post-processing, like calculating metrics and so on. You can use it to train an AI, for example, a neural network. And this neural network should then in the future be able to have a look at new interaction data that comes in. And based on the new incoming interaction data, provide you with the with some information about what user emotions potentially were there or are there in the corresponding data. So that's the basic idea for the future. What we already worked on is this lower part. So the creation of some kind of data set that would help us to train the AI. And we created such a data set, and it's already published, and I have the corresponding paper referenced here in the presentation. But I also want to tell you a bit about how we created this data set, because this creation actually showed the different challenges that we faced while creating the data set. So first of all, if you want to create such a data set, as I said, you need some user interactions and you need the corresponding emotions. So what did we do? We set up a corresponding user study in which we asked users to interact with a certain user interface, and then we recorded their user interactions, but we also tried to derive the emotions that the users had. What you see here is a picture of the basic setup that we had for creating this data set. So the users sat in front of a laptop, and then they interacted with a small web application. It was actually a travel expense report, and we all know travel expense reports can trigger emotions, usually negative ones, but we also integrated some additional negative triggers so that we were actually sure that we did not only trigger positive emotions, but also some negative. What you see next to the screen are sheets with the input data that we provided to the users, like where did they actually travel. So it was a fake travel expense report. So we said, consider you were traveling to a certain location, and then also with some receipts for the hotel and all these things that you typically would have when you were on some kind of business travel. And then they filled in the travel expense report, and in the meantime, we were recording their faces using the camera integrated in the notebook, and also their eye movements. And after they filled in everything, we asked them about their emotional state, once by a short questionnaire on the screen, but also in an additional interview that we did afterwards. So what did we record? Actually, we recorded the keyboard interactions, so like every key press, key release, and stuff like that. All the mouse interactions, including mouse movements and clicks of all different mouse buttons. And in addition, we derived the user emotions, so that we had both the interaction data, which are the left two ones, and the corresponding emotions that the users had. What did it look like in the end? I have here a very, very, very short excerpt of all the data that we recorded. But what you see here on the left is the different interactions that took place, like key presses, key releases, mouse movements, and so on, with some additional information like was an additional key pressed or not, which kind of key on the keyboard was pressed, and so on. And this is actually the extension of the table. Then also the emotion information that we had for the different users at the very specific points in time. So this was the basic result of executing this study. But there were some challenges throughout the whole process. The whole process for creating this data and then afterwards applying it is depicted here. So we first thought of what should the study look like? So how can we actually trigger emotions, for example, or what do we need to record, and what is potentially helpful in recording? Then how do we actually store the data so that it can be analyzed afterwards? What do we need to store within the data and stuff like that? what do we have to consider in addition to set up the study? So, for example, what are the introductory words that we say to each participant that comes there, and so on. And then also, what do we do to evaluate the recorded data? For example, how do we actually determine the user emotions? Also, this was a question. And then in the next steps, we wanted to think about the post-processing of the recorded data and the training of the AI. And when we actually performed these steps, the post-processing and the training of the AI, we found the different challenges that we talk about in the paper and that I want to briefly show to you today. The challenges can be categorized into three different categories. The first category is on the level of capturing data. So we already had issues when we just wanted to capture the data so that we have a clean baseline of data that we can work with afterwards. What you also need is not only the correct interaction data that you record, but you also need reliable emotion data. You can compare this with the training of an AI that is capable of determining pets in images, for example. If you want to do that, you first have a large set of images, and then you put a label on each of the image, what you actually see on that image. If it's a cat, or if it's a dog, if it's both, or whatever. And then you feed this data into the training algorithm, and then afterwards the training algorithm can, for a new image, detect whether it's a cat or a dog or whatever. But for this, you need reliable labels, so you really need humans that actually reliably label the data. But also for the emotion data, we need it. So we need reliable information about whether somebody experiences joy or whether somebody is sad or whatever. Yeah. So this also needs to be reliable. And there we had some issues to create this reliable data, emotion data. And then we also experienced some challenges with respect to the post-processing of the data. And I will now go into the details of four guidelines, or four challenges and corresponding guidelines that we have in the paper about that. The first issue that we had was about anonymization. So we basically set up the study and asked our participants to fill in the fictional travel expense report, and we provided them with all the information that they were asked to fill in, like a fictive name of the person that actually traveled, the fictive hotel, and all these things. But what did these people do? They first started entering their own name and their own address and all this information. So when we recorded the user interactions, we directly had user data in our data, which was quite a challenge. In addition, because we recorded also the face of the users, we also had some personal data, like a video of the face of the users, which is quite personal actually. So also there we had to consider how do we handle the situation with the personal data. So some things were then actually planned, like recording the faces, but we also had these unplanned recordings of personal data. And this is a challenge, I think, that can happen to much research in that area with respect to users. You can also, you can always expect that at some point you will record some personal information. And that's why this was basically a challenge. And that's why we provided a guideline or multiple guidelines saying, how do you actually prevent this from happening? The first thing, you should never expect your data to be completely anonymous. So when you plan the overall study, you should directly plan beforehand that there is some point where you have to have a look at your data and have to check whether there is some personal information in there. This can be challenging because you don't know where the personal data is. For example, in one of the studies that we had, we did not record the concrete letters that were used when they typed in name and surname and whatever. So things where we expected that potentially some personal data could be entered. But we still recorded the letters in some free text field where they just could provide some additional information. And what did the people do? In this additional information field, they entered something like their personal data, and we did not really expect that to happen. So whenever you record the things, you should be aware that it could happen everywhere, and you need to have an idea of how can you actually find that personal data and how can you actually remove that. And that's the next thing. So you need to check your data for personal information, and then if you find such kind of personal information, you have to remove the key specific information that actually is entered. We know already from research that it's also possible to identify users just based on the way they move their mouse or whatever, but this is not an issue for our research. The reason is that if we don't store the concrete person's name together with the mouse data that they produce somewhere, then we never know who actually created a certain trace of user interactions. The next challenge that we faced was actually to derive reliable emotion annotations. The first thing that we wanted to do is we bought a very, very expensive piece of software that said, well, we can analyze videos of persons in front of a computer, and then we can tell you what emotions these people have. And we said, well, that's a good thing because we all are not psychologists, and having a tool that can do this for us is really good. But what happened? It worked perfectly fine as long as the people in front of the computer never did something like or yeah. Whenever they had their hand in their face, this automatic emotion recognition did not work anymore. Or if they just looked out of the window for a second and then they looked back, then you had some artifacts like, for example, sadness just because they had a weird head movement or whatever, but they weren't sad at all. So this was one of the issues. Next issue was that these algorithms that actually do this automated tagging, they are based on actors that pretended to have these emotions, and then the algorithms were trained with that. But actors show the emotions differently than real persons do. So in the end, the training has already some issues. In the end, and these algorithms work best for positive emotions, but for negative emotions, they don't work that well. So in the end, we had issues with using this automated emotional annotation, and what we had to do is we had to use our other data sources, so the recordings and the eye tracking, and had to do the emotion annotation manually. So based on this experience, we can directly tell you whenever you want to create such kind of data sets, be aware that you probably need multiple ways of determining your labels that you need. So one way may not work out in the end, and it would be bad if you have something like we had 50 sessions with users, and in the end you find out, oh, you cannot derive the user emotions. That's bad. Yeah, if you use something like the automated facial coding engine, then please check it beforehand whether it works in your situation or not. In our case, it didn't really work out. We had to do this then manually. So we had 3 students having had a look at each of the videos again, and then labeling the emotions independently of each other with the majority voting and all these things. What we also found out is that we have these situations where we actually lose emotion information. The reason is just simple. We found out that whenever users interact with a keyword, they show less emotions in comparison to when they don't interact with the computer at all. So it was really like they did something on the computer and then there was an emotion and they did not do anything, neither mouse movement nor any interaction with the keyboard. So when you create then the data set in the end, you have all the interaction data with some minimal emotions attached to it. But when you would have labeled really expressive emotions, then you don't have any interaction data where you can put the label on. That's a challenge. That's a challenge that we actually have to live with also in the future. We don't know yet how to solve that issue for our work, but it can happen. What we also had is we had some time lags in between the different recordings that we had, underlying data and all these things, which was also a bit problematic. So diverse things with respect to the correct storage of the emotion. This is basically also something that you would have to consider. You definitely need to store your emotional data not only for the times where people interact, but also for all the other times. And this is actually something that we did not really consider beforehand. But we did not, or we still have all the data, so we can still consider how do we handle the situation. But this was also some kind of luck. So if you do that in the future, be aware that you store a continuous data stream. And then with respect to the next thing, when we actually started to train our first AI, what you do before you train the AI, you calculate some metrics that you can feed into the training process to train your AI based on your interaction data. And such kind of metrics can be what's the speed of interacting with the keyboard like, how fast do you actually press the keys, how fast do you move your mouse, how directional do you have your mouse movements, do you more make some curves or are you pretty direct when you move to a certain button or whatever. So there are different metrics that you can calculate and that you can then feed into any AI training. But the problem was we tried to reuse different metrics from the literature. The problem was that most of the literature did not really explain the details of the metrics that they already used. So very, very seldom we have mathematical formulas or definitions or whatever, something that you can really base on where you can say, okay, that's the way how they actually calculated these different metrics. And this is an issue. So whenever you do something like that, be aware that you may not have enough information about metrics. And if you want to provide the results of your research data, either do not provide the metrics that you calculated and that you include in your data set, or provide them, but then with all the required replication information, like how did you actually calculate it? What was the actual formula that you applied? So that other researchers can really use your data set and have a better understanding of what you did and potentially also find issues that you that come up when training the AI because of the usage of certain metrics. In the paper, we have 3 further issues. This is a list of all challenges that we faced, but I really hope that you also have a look at the paper and that I cause enough interest on your side for the topic. As a conclusion of our work, basically we can say creating a data set for training an AI is challenging. I think that's a quite general and generic statement that you can see in many AI projects, but we also see it in our work, and the task of doing this can never be underestimated. What we found out for now is our data set, we had 50 participants in our study and they produced quite a lot of data, but it's not enough. We need many more data to actually train our AI. And that's why collaboration is needed in our case. So what we now need to do is we need to reach out to the community in the user experience area and ask them whether they can somehow contribute to creating the data set, because there are thousands of user tests taking place every day, but we lose all the data that they currently produce in there, and we need some way to record this data there, so to have enough data to, in the end, be able to generate or to train an AI. And for this, we also need some kind of community learning. That's also something that we are currently working on. So we are more active in the community, talk more with them, to also find out what are their experiences with respect to measuring user experience, and what would be their challenges if they want to support us and all these things. So in the future, we want to share our knowledge about what we experience in our research area. We also want to create a manual. So if somebody really wants to provide us with some data, how do these people actually have to do that so that we can work with the data? We want to expand the data set so that we have a larger and larger and ever-growing data set that can help us train a better AI. We want to add further data types because currently we only recorded mouse and keyboard interactions, but we also want to have touch-based interactions and other modalities because they are there and we need to support them in the future. And we also need measures already now to check the validity of whatever is there, the validity of the emotions which are in the data set. But also, if you train an AI and the AI somehow predicts some kind of emotions, is this prediction correct or not? So also there we need some kind of means to validate the results of the AI. Yeah, and with this I come to an end. So what is our research area? We are basically in the context of AI-based UX evaluation. We want to identify user emotions based on their user interactions. We face diverse challenges in this area when creating a data set with which we can actually train an AI. And in the future, we want to reach out more to the community, to talk to them, and then also to get further data from them, because we cannot do all these evaluations on our own to have enough data to train an AI. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions.